And the total linear distance of that is about 2,700 feet, which includes part of it on the bay and part of it on the marsh. And the other thing, when you look at this drawing over here, is that this brown hatched area is what the proposed fill area would be at an 8-foot height. The wall ends about here because this is going to continue to accrete sand because it's in a low turbidity zone, and dissolved solids drop when there's not a current to wash them out. This area in here has been growing steadily, and you can see this is the 2012 survey of where the land was prior to the past 5 years of erosion activity. So clearly all the land is being reduced. Hurricane Hermine reduced it even greater, and we received a permit from the Department of Environmental Protection to do that beach restoration, which we did do. It's not complete yet, but we have a year to get it finished, and so it's largely completed. And we used some of the spoil that had been piled up from Hurricane Dennis to do that fill area over here and reclaim the lost uplands. So now you'll see in this drawing that we did, there's a road coming in here that comes up and tees up and goes to a turnaround zone. Now, I'd like to segue for a moment. You may recall that Shannon Hartsfield, president or director of the Franklin County Seafoods Workers Association, was here and talked about the need for boat launch facilities, safe boat launch facilities, and the number of oystermen that might be using East Hole during this period of time that those are allowed for harvesting was in the neighborhood of 35 to 40. There aren't 35 to 40 trailer parking spaces at the Causeway boat launch. And I spoke with Mr. Hartsfield the other day, and he's still suffering from the back injuries he had incurred when launching his boat there. And I don't know how, and he talked about a near drowning incident where a boat was launched and immediately sunk because it had a low transom. I feel like the county has a lot of legal liability exposure with that inadequate boatyard. This boat launch is something to be considered because you've been put on notice that people are being injured there and that there's destruction of property as a result. I don't know the legal end, but it seems to me that a safer boat launch in a harbor basin like this would be an advantage to everyone involved, and we need to allow for, my thought is up to 100 parking spaces, with a good number of those, probably 50 to 75, having an ability to trailer a vessel in. So if you knock off 50 feet off of this uplands border, you're gonna pinch off everything out here. Because coming in 50 feet this way and 50 feet this way, you might get one lane of road through. And if Mr. Currington is consistent with his statement, he said that we could put fill around the basin because it was a man-made structure. Is that correct, Mark?
Yes, I had no objections to
the use of it around the basin because it was a man-made structure. But this whole island was a man-made structure too, as was documented by Mr. Ronnie Bloodworth's testimony here before this committee, or before this commission, that he ran the dredge that did it, and this was all man-made fill out here. This whole thing is man-made from back in the 50s and 60s, and so what we're going to be left with is a very limited amount of parking in this area here. The boat barn concept goes away or gets greatly minimized, and some parking over here. But 50 feet, I mean, when you add a boat and a trailer to it, you're talking about a 50 or 75 foot of total length. And it's greatly diminishing the effectiveness of the harbor. And I would argue that this land mass is, in fact, a water-dependent requirement, because when these automobiles pulling trailers come here, they're going to need a place to park them, and they don't have that now. And the 12 or so spaces that exist on the causeway just aren't sufficient. And that was also the testimony of Mr. Hartsfield and also Mr. Larry Hale, who I believe is here today. And it's needed. And that's what it was used for in the past, and that's what it will be used for in the future. And the other objective that I have, of course, is to promote youth education programs, and we have a record of doing that. And in a county born out of, with all the water resources that we have, we need youth education programs and boat building and things of that nature, which you saw the video on last time around. If you go to the YouTube page, you'll see a lot more of that. In the YouTube channel for the Maritime Museum, we won an award from the State Department of Education for inclusion of science, technology, engineering, and math in these boat building programs. We're working with Franklin County Schools now to bring it into the Challenged Youth arrangement. So the objective is to maximize the opportunity for utilization of this facility by having plenty of upland land with which to park those trailers. And that will not be paved surfaces, that'll be gravel surfaces, permeable. And the sand will be permeable as well. So, I would like to briefly now jump over to this Excel spreadsheet. This is what you get when you click on the link on the SGI Basin page for public records request. We received around 12 or so responses, 15 roads. And what this does, this has a link on every one of these that takes you to the actual document. And I pulled out one, and Commissioner Sanders, I think is where I had good photographic evidence. This is a thumbnail. This is the date of the permit. This is the number of pages of the permit that we received from the planning department, the consultant GEA, the address, the fill, not reference, and so the rest of this is analytical in terms of what was done on these projects. And so if I click this right here, it will bring me to this page. And this, now I'm going to go to the, well, I can't go to the top easily, or maybe I can. Let's see here. This is the building permit document that we received. And you come on down, and it references critical shoreline, yes. Critical habitat zone, yes. So this is clearly a project that was in the critical habitat zone. And I think these are probably the criterion that were used to pull most of these permits. And I went down and read through it. Well, another thing I did is, through the use of some software utilities, I translated all this to searchable text. And so I did my Dan did an analytical pass, then I did an analytical pass, and I used word search tools, and you can use that too. If you do a Control F while you're in there, you can do a search for the word feet, height, wall, foot, you know, the things that would and spoil or fill. So you can find out if there's the words fill is not in there, then they ain't talking about, there's nothing about the fill, even though it was done. I then went to Google Earth, and I pulled up the address, and look what I find. This is what was allowed by the county in 2011. I'll go back over here. And so what this individual did, and it's right off Highway 98, so it's probably easy for anybody who wants to go see it, is to pump this into their GPS and go right by it. This is the riprap wall, and I believe this one says something about plastic behind it or something, and this is all obviously fill that has been planted with some type of grass and palm trees. And it's a beautiful thing. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just saying this is an example where the county has allowed this kind of thing to happen. And it doesn't, and so I'll go back to the matrix. And so we come across this, this item E. So wall length 100, wall height not specified. There was nothing referencing a wall height or even a wall in this. FEMA analysis. None of these had a FEMA analysis done. What is the FEMA analysis? The FEMA analysis deals with wave ramp up during periodic episodal storm events and wave overtopping that required us to have 8 feet in order to do it. And I submit to you that all of these other permits issued were deficient by not requiring the FEMA analysis, and yet I'm being penalized for doing it right, using the engineer who did the study. And by the way, that engineering study is on the page here too. Back up to the top, over here. FEMA engineer analysis. You can go look at it. And the author of that analysis is sitting right here in the room, and she's going to speak to this for a moment. So that all these other permits were issued with nobody mentioning anything about FEMA. Now, FEMA came into existence in 2013. I don't know if it was before or after this particular date, the FEMA requirement for this thing. Is that correct? 2013. All right. So let's go through the other elements of this. Wall length 100 feet, fill or wall height not specified, no FEMA. Critical habitat zone criterion evaluated. None of these have had the critical habitat zone evaluated like I've been criticized and critiqued on. I mean, this was never, critical habitat zone is referenced in that it was passed and there's a checkbox on the thing, but there's nobody going in and drilling into this kind of detail about what elements of critical habitat zone are required or not required or met or not met. And that's right up through the current. None of these have that. The fill material here was rock. Slide over a little bit more. Fill material unknown. And most of these were unknown. What kind of mitigation was required? The critical habitat zone ordinance requires mitigation when there's fill that goes into the critical habitat zone. We proposed that. What kind of plantings were what kind of plantings in the filled area were provided? I mean, none of these had those criterion met. And there's example after example. You can look at the thumbnails. I don't want to take any more time, but I will say that on this, here's a 186-foot wood retaining wall along the New River. This is in the marsh in the Carabel area on the New River. 240 feet. Where did that go? 240 feet here on Gulf Beach Drive, St. George Island. And another thing, when you go to look at Google Earth, you see wall after wall after wall after wall after wall. These walls are put in side by side with these property owners, so they would go well into the 2,000, 3,000 feet range. There's a lot of this activity already taking place, and every one of these you can click on and go to the bottom of the report, and you'll see where I brought in the Google Earth views. So I'm really not asking for anything that's out of characteristics with what's already been approved on a regular basis. I'm going to go back to the web page just for the summary. Here's my summary. Here's the analysis that I did, and I'm not perfect. There may be a mistake, but I think it's pretty darn close because I was in analytics for 30-plus years in my career. First, there were at least 3 critical habitat zone-related permit documents that were not reproduced in the response, which were performed by Garlic Environmental Associates as determined from a review by GBA. When we first got these, Dan said, hey, I don't think this covers them all. He went back and looked at his records, and here's 3 of them that were there. Why were they excluded? Perhaps accident, who knows? And what is the scope of them, others that were excluded from the review? So that's a concern. We didn't get a complete response on the public documents request. Only residential projects were included with the documents provided. I don't know if there were any commercials or not, and that's just more of an observation, except that in that observation there was a 240-foot example. By the way, the total length of the post and board wall we propose is 2,700 feet, which is roughly 10 of those 240 residential permits. There was no evaluation of critical habitat zone criterion undertaken in any of the variances approved. this leaves this as the only project where compliance with the critical habitat zone criteria has been scrutinized, especially to the extent that it's been scrutinized here. Nobody else had to go through this process. For whatever reason, we were chosen as the poster child. And I don't know what that is, and I'd like to know why that is, why everybody else gets these and we don't. No FEMA analysis was conducted on any of the projects. The FEMA analysis would, at a minimum, result in a wall height requirement for the St. George Island Bayfront projects to be the same as determined by the harbor project at 8 feet at mean high water. Since these are all based on wave ramp up and the related criteria described in the FEMA analysis letter reviewed earlier. This calls into question why the planning department isn't requiring a FEMA analysis on these, and that all of these should have been done at 8 feet from 2013 forward. And we did it. We went the extra mile, and yet I'm being critiqued for the 8 foot. And Mark Currington here, I mean, we've explained this to Mark, yet it doesn't wash, you know. And we see that these projects go into the critical habitat zone, and one of these permits had structures in the critical habitat zone. So there, let's see. Most of the projects made no reference to fill at all. Yet, as shown on the current satellite imagery, most, if not all, the projects did have fill placed behind the seawall or retaining wall. There were no stipulation as to the type of fill or planting mitigation required in the by the ordinance in the permits that were granted. I did not add it to my notes here, but there were only 2 that referenced wall height. One was 7 feet and one was 10 feet. The one at 10 feet high is over on the eastern bank of the Apalachicola River, right off Bayshore Drive, probably 200 or 300 yards from US 98. And that was filled, and it's a nice, beautiful lawn with palm trees on it. You can see those. They are, yeah. And in fact, the one that was at 10 feet, I believe, is either the one at 7 feet or 10 feet, was County Attorney Mike Schuler asking the members of the commission, what is going to be the height of this wall? And it comes out either 7 or 10 feet. If you go through these, take a few hours and go through all the documents we've received so far, and just do a word search for feet or foot or height or wall or spoil or fill, you'll see what the regularity with which these terms are included. So this is you can go in here and click on these imageries whenever the pointer comes up, and it'll take you to it. It'll load up Excel, and then from Excel you can click to the links. Commissioners, this is a great project. I've demonstrated philanthropic commitment to this community with the Maritime Museum. This is an extension of that. Why this was chosen to be the most scrutinized project is a mystery to me, when it is clear that the objectives are consistent with what we've been doing at the Maritime Museum. And I'm going to turn the microphone over to our engineer. You ready? She can explain the report. I'll while she's coming up here, I'll go to this link. This is a big report, so it'll probably take a while to load. Give me engineer analysis, right click, open a new tab. And it's loading. See, okay. Can everybody read that? No. Do you have the, let's see, there must be a way. I'm not familiar with this browser version, but I can't go up here on the keyboard. I ask you, let us move ahead with this project. It's a great benefit to the island, to the community, to the county, and this region. Nothing that and I'll tell you what, we'll eliminate the wall as long as we just put in the sink. And we're going to get that, as an alternative, we can do that as an alternative.
Please state your name for the record, please. Gina Johnson, Southeastern Consulting Engineers. Our firm was hired by Mr. Floyd, like he said, back in 2015, after the approval was given to put the fill in the A-zone, the project approval. We were hired to do the stormwater along Bayshore Drive. In discussions of working out the stormwater there, did I say something wrong, Mr. Massey?
No, I'm listening to you.
Okay, all right. We were hired to do the stormwater along Bayshore Drive, which was part of the approval. After we were talking, Mr. Floyd wanted to see if it was possible to put some additional fill in the V zone. The Franklin County floodplain ordinance states that fill cannot be put in the V zone, the VE zone, at a slope greater than 5 to 1. So putting up a vertical wall, needed to come before the Board of Adjustments for variance to that. So also in the ordinance, it states that you can put, if you want to put non-structural fill at a slope greater than 5 to 1, you need to do an engineering analysis to check to see if the proposed fill would be overtopped. There's erosion, there's overtopping, there's wave run-up, and overland wave propagation. So we went back and we did that analysis. We brought it to the planning department and turned it in to see if we could get that variance. The results of that analysis, I won't go into all the details, but the results of it was that the wave run-up would come up to an elevation of 7.76 feet. So then a wall height of 8 feet was determined, so that the wave didn't overtop the wall. And that's basically all I have. Unless you have any specific questions or anything, I'd be glad to answer them.
Does the board have any questions of the engineer?
One thing I would
Thank you.
do is-
I do have one question, Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Okay.
Are you actually a licensed PE in the
Yes.
state of Florida?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
These initial drawings were provided by Gina. Then there was the detail of the report, which we utilized these in the drawings that were in our final master plan. You'll recognize the roadway and these things. Then it gets in, I'm going to move through this relatively quickly. Then there's the actual engineering drawings, the wave ramp-up analysis that Gina did. And, I've really thought that I should check that R equals R rough slope over smooth slope. right
You
now,
should.
Because I'm really not sure. Bit of humor in all this. But it's a very complex process, and that's what resulted in the 8-foot requirement. And to go back to the master plan, try to get back, there it is. You'll see most of this comes from Gina's AutoCAD drawings and were imported in this master AutoCAD drawing. And imagine yourself trying to park your boat and car on a 5 to 1 slope or something less than that. I mean, this, in order to be functional and usable, the kind of usage that it will certainly have in the future, it needs to be a level surface, and it needs to maximize that surface. And to not do that greatly limits its functionality, but I just think it's reasonable. I mean, this undulating surface area around the wetlands is a large cause of the problem of so much. I mean, if this was all just rectangular square, it'd be a lot easier. But we're coming down here, we're doing this all around, coming back up and around, and that is trying to get the maximum use of the land, the uplands area for parking of vehicles and their boats. Now, I'll submit, if there are any other questions, I just would submit that if you'd like to strike the wall, allow us just to go ahead and put sand in there, bring it up to that height, 8 foot, that's required by the FEMA. We can do that. Maybe make that since this is a Board of Adjustment, you can make that criterion change on the fly, I presume.
I quite frankly couldn't hear nothing you said, George. You need to get up to the mic. I heard parts
I'm
of
sorry.
it, but you're talking about striking and that.
Well, I guess if the wall, I think the wall is a very expensive element, but it will help prevent sand from washing back into the bay.
What's your requirement of your DEP permit?
It does not require a wall. It's the FEMA that requires the 8-foot height.
I know the height, but you
And-
gotta
and- and-
contain all your spoil on your site.
Yes, sir.
And you can't just throw it up there and let it just wash back in the water. Is that correct?
Well, it says it all has to be contained, but essentially
That's
that's it.
correct.
Right.
Which I think the board views is the reason you want an 8-foot wall, or try to contain all of this spoil on your site or property.
Yes, sir.
So you're stating now that that's not the intention of the wall?
No, sir, that is the intention of the wall. I'm just saying that if the wall is and there are uplands here with the topographic survey, and Mark saw these, where it's 6 feet, already 6 feet high. So the wall at 8 feet is only marginally more, and it's also a foot less than the causeway. The essence of it is, it's doing it the right way. It's not the least expensive, but if the wall is the problem, then I guess we could try and do just sand. That was one of the things that was discussed back and forth with Mr. Currington. But I would prefer it to be a wall that gives more or less guarantee. I mean, it's going to require maintenance from time to time, but it's similar to what you see at St. James Golf Club, golf course. It's similar to what you see at the old Breakaway Lodge, and it's similar to what you see elsewhere on some of these permits that have been approved here recently in the last 5 years, that these walls are used to prevent runoff and erosion.
Yeah.
Well, Commissioners, my recommendation is that you not bifurcate or approve part and disapprove the other part of this application. You should consider the application as a whole. In regards to the statement concerning the walls at St. James Bay and out at Mr. Floyd's other project here north of Apalachicola, I believe those were both PUDs, and for better or worse, PUDs are treated differently, or actually one may be a DRI, isn't it, Mark, over at St. James Bay?
St. James Bay is.
Yeah,
St.
those
James
are
Bay
treated
is a
differently
DRI.
under your code, so to the extent those walls are there, it's because they are treated differently under the code. This particular site has different criterion that you've got to consider. And I guess since I'm addressing procedural issues, I know I sent an email to Mr. Garlick, but I understand that you apparently were out of the country when I sent it, so you may not have seen it yet. The applicant is one of your corporate entities, Apalachicola Maritime Museum.
Yeah, the Apalachicola Maritime
Let
Museum.
me ask,
Go ahead.
and then you
Sure.
answer, please, sir.
Sure.
The applicant is your company, or one of your corporations, Apalachicola Maritime Museum. That's the charitable organization. Is that correct?
That's not correct.
The applicant is not Apalachicola?
As you stated it, it was not correct.
Okay, but what is the name of
The
the applicant?
Apalachicola Maritime Museum is a not federally and state designated not-for-profit public entity, which is run by a board of directors.
Okay, and
I do
they-
not own that entity.
Well, thank
That
you for that
entity
correction.
works as
Are they-
just
is
like a
that entity
church.
the tenant of the property?
I'm sorry?
Is that entity you just described, or are they the
There
tenant
is
or
a,
the owner?
there is a management agreement, operations management agreement between the not-for-profit entity and the independent LLCs for each property, each vessel. And this was all based on the advice of my attorneys in Atlanta that put all this together for me over 10 years ago.
But the property owner is an entity called HLS Property Management
Right.
LLC, is that correct?
That's correct.
And are you the managing member and
So-
controlling member?
You've
of-
obviously been out to Sunbiz. Yes, that's correct.
Okay, my only point procedurally is to make sure, I mean, typically, we would not consider an application for a development order from the tenant unless we get some assurance that the owner is aware of and approves of the application that's been made. And that's my only purpose is.
Yes. I could go into the reasoning for that. It deals with accident liability mitigation. And so I followed their advice on this. I could have my attorneys send you a letter in terms of how this structure would address this particular issue, this
I just
permit
think
issuance.
that from the standpoint of the board, as long as they have an assurance that you, as the owner of the property through the entity HLS Property Management, agree with and consent to them considering the applications, all I'm trying to get on the record.
Yes, that's fine.
I mean, I
As I
would not
understand
want for them to approve this development application and then have the property owner come back and say, well, I don't agree to that.
I agree to that. Thank you. Are there any more questions? I mean,
Any questions of the board?
I got it, yeah, I got it. Why do you not think it's a good idea, Mr. Mark?
I base my objections on, because it's placing fill in that 50-foot critical habitat zone.